This podcast is part of the Shareable Podcast Network. Learn more at shareable.fm. This podcast is Shareable. I'm your host, Jeff Gibbard, commonly known as the world's most handsome strategist and professional speaker. I'm also a superhero. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single Shareable episode. And that's it. That's the intro. Short and sweet. Let's get to the show. Welcome back to Shareable. My name is Jeff Gibbard. I'm your host, and it is nice to have you back listening to episodes of Shareable. It's nice to be recording them. Sorry, I've been away for a while. I know I said that in the last episode, but thank you for coming back. Today, my guest is Lisa Peskin, CEO and founder of Business Development University. She has over 30 years of experience in sales and sales management. She's also passionate about helping individuals, teams, and companies maximize their sales efforts. And through Business Development University, Lisa has helped thousands of selling and non-selling professionals not only meet, but significantly exceed their goals and take their performance to the next level. Today, we're going to have a fantastic conversation about all things sales in a way that is truly relatable, helpful, and is going to make you into a total sales rock star. Lisa, welcome to Shareable.
Oh my gosh, Jeff, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
This is so cool to actually have you on because we've known each other for like a decade at this point, and this has never happened. And that's on me. That's my bad. Sorry about that.
But hey, you know what? You impressed me back then. And when I heard about some of the stuff that you've been doing, I wanted to be part of it. You know, even just your whole philosophy in life and the way you look at things and the way you help businesses is pretty unbelievable. And I'm thrilled to be part of today and maybe give some people some ideas that they could take back and help them to be more successful.
Oh, I am absolutely certain we're going to have that happen today because I'm very jazzed to talk to you about sales because it's a conversation that in the work I'm doing now versus the work that kind of I used to do, much more social media focused. I talk to people a lot more about sales now than I ever have in my life. And my education in sales came by way of, you know, I watched a lot of videos of people that, talk about sales like, Jeffrey Gitomer, and then a number of books about sales and pitching. And then I've come across a number of your resources. I went to some events and webinars with, people that we both know. So like my whole thing is very like homegrown. And the thing that I have not really struggled with as much as the questions that I get is around this mindset of sales. And I want to talk to you a lot about that today, because I think that that's where people struggle. And your experience is so extensive in working in the world of sales that I really want to understand how you go about, I don't want to say fixing it because it's not like it's broken, but like people really struggle with this. You even say the word sales. And I don't know if you get the same reaction, but you tell people you work in, helping them with sales. Do you get that reaction where people are like, oh, I don't like sales?
Well, you just mentioned a couple things that, I think are so important. And, you talk about the whole mindset of sales. And after 34 years in sales and sales management, and if you count my waitressing days, now we're talking 40 plus years. So I've totally just, aged myself. But I truly believe from my core that half of sales success is attitude and motivation. Half.
Yep.
Not 1/3, but half. And that's something we have control over. But why wouldn't everybody in this whole wide world be in sales? You get to meet new people all the time. You get to make unlimited amount of money. There's a direct correlation between the activities that you do and the results that you get. But it's not easy. And we're going to get way more no's than we are yeses. And we have to be mentally strong in order to be successful. But then you talked about, people really struggling. And you know what, especially, in these crazy times right now, I'm talking to so many salespeople, and there's a word that I've been hearing over and over, and it's, I don't want to be salesy. I don't want to be salesy. But you know what? In all my years of experience of doing this, I believe to my core that nobody in this whole wide world likes to be sold anything, and we really have to stop trying to sell our stuff. It's about figuring out a way to help an individual or a company with your product or service. So, as long as you truly believe that you could help them out, you never have to worry about being salesy because all you're trying to do is find people and companies you can help out.
Yeah, I 100% am in line with that because I've always tried to reframe that conversation because I hear something similar. Sales feels icky. I don't want to feel salesy. Used car salesman comes up a lot, pushy, like all those sorts of things. And I go, well, why does it have to be that? Right? Like when I talk to a prospect, all I'm trying to figure out is, do I like this person enough that I would want to help them? Are they going to potentially like me enough that they want me to help them? And then is what I do a match for the problem that they have? Because if they do, then like this whole thing loses all of that kind of weird energy that I think people assign to it. Because all I'm doing is saying like, can I help this person? And if I can help them, then like, cool. What's the arrangement by which we both agree that we'll make this work? And like, to me, it's like, there's no additional stuff that's attached to that. I'm just trying to help a person and we'll see what the arrangement we can agree to. And I set my prices. And if you're cool with that, then like, great, let's make a thing happen. Where does all that extra stuff come from? I guess I don't know where it comes from. Where do you think the whole salesy thing started? Why is that a problem?
Because people inherently care what other people think. That's really what it comes down to. So I was working with somebody yesterday, and she made a comment about never wanting to be perceived in a certain way. And you might find this hard to believe, Jeff, but if you met me as a young kid, you would have met someone shy, insecure. And honestly, the last thing I would ever want to do is what I'm doing now, let alone be in sales. And when I originally got in sales, I didn't want to get into sales. Who wants to get into sales unless people grow up with salespeople in their life? But
Yeah.
I wanted this marketing degree and I wanted just to understand sales. But you know what? This is, like I said, a fabulous profession, but it's not easy. And then there's another really important piece. How about all those people in this world that aren't really salespeople per se, but they're owners of companies, they're consultants, they're architects, engineers, accountants, lawyers that need to get more clients, but just don't want to come off in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. There's a book that I'm sure you've probably read by Dan Pink called To Sell is Human. And he talks about all of the other areas of life in which we are selling. And something that I don't know if we covered when you and I got back in touch, but in between when we first met and now, I had actually started an online dating consultancy as like a little side hustle, right? So I was helping people to design their online dating profile and helping them and coaching them with, the art of texting and things like that. And the reason I bring it up is that the way that I had found success is that I found that there was a premise that was very similar in online dating to online marketing. That virtually everything is the same. You're presenting yourself, you're trying to find your target audience, et cetera. And I always try to think of like the dates almost as like sales conversations, right? Like you're trying to identify, is there a match here between the solution I have to the problem that you have? Like, are we both looking for the same things? Yada, 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 right? So I look at it as like sales is this activity of matching problems to solutions. And I don't know at what point it happened for me, but it's interesting you brought up your experience being a waitress, right? Because I actually attribute any of my comfort with sales back to the time that I was a server and a bartender. It was like really like the boot camp for like learning how to do it in a pretty low stakes environment, right? Like you're not dealing with like multi-billion-dollar deals. It's like, do you want the filet or so? I don't know when it happened for me, but I found that I kind of reached like a zen of sales, like where I just no longer thought about all the tactics and all the strategies. And I just got really comfortable with the idea of like, I've got a thing, you've got a thing. Let's see if we can match it. You are in the business of training people. So there's a process to that. I came upon it in some way, somehow, some form, self-training, whatever. And it just kind of happened. And I have the personality where I never shy away from talking to anybody, and confrontation doesn't bother me, any of that. Some people do. What does the process even look like for helping people to get to that point where like they can get over that fear of being perceived a certain way, or, you know, learning the process of what goes along it to a point where like all of the tactics fade to the background and they can just be present in that sale?
So there's actually, I talked about one of the aspects of success in sales, which I believe is half, which is attitude and motivation. But there's two more aspects of success in sales. The first one is filling that pipeline with good qualified opportunities on a consistent basis. That's going to include three different components. It's going to include our repeat business, keeping our existing clients and customers. It's going to be upselling and cross-selling, either selling more to the existing people we have or finding new people within that organization that we could help out. And the last piece is the net new business coming in the door that we get through prospecting, networking, or marketing efforts. So that's where a lot of salespeople, business owners, anyone that really needs to get some more prospect appointments struggles. But that's one aspect. And there are certain processes for how to do that. How to keep our existing customers, how do we penetrate and leverage our existing customers, and how do we get enough net new opportunities or logos in the door. The second piece is the process. So once I've got a suspect or prospect in front of me virtually or in person, what's the process that I take them through? How do I run an effective meeting? How do I gather key information? How do I present my solutions? How do I handle objections? And ultimately, how do I close the business? So that process is very, very repeatable. There are key components to it. And you mentioned that you were successful without necessarily learning all of this in a formal manner that I did during my ADP days when, it was a sales machine, right? But a lot of the things that are key components, some people are missing of that process. And that's why their close ratios are way lower than they should be. And that's why their average sale is way lower. That's why their sales cycles are way longer than they should be. And that's why their pipelines aren't where they need to be.
Do you think that there are certain rules to sales? Because as you're talking about it, like it occurs to me that like in my world of sales, right? Like, so I have certain things that are kind of like very process oriented. I know I'm going to meet someone, then I'm going to do a 15-minute phone call just to see if it's a real quick qualifying, like is it even worth us doing the longer meeting? Then we do the longer meeting. And then if we decide out of that, usually from that, we're moving on to proposal. If not, there might be a follow-up, but then we do proposal, we kind of negotiate the terms of that. And then we move to agreements and so on. And then we're working together. So that's kind of like my process. It's been my process for many years. But there's all of these, these tactics of like, there's trial closes and there's just so many different things. And at the same time as people use different tactics in the world of sales, the customer starts to wisen up to certain things that are happening. Like, oh, here's the point where they're going to introduce the scarcity play, right? And then here's the point that they're going to do this and that. You've been doing this for long enough that I think you've been able to watch some of the ebbs and flows and probably seen what is the consistent through line of things that work. Are there any rules to sales that kind of stand the test of time in your experience? And if so, what are they?
Do you have a 24-hour podcast that we could possibly speak? Because really, if I could take all of the things that I've learned, I've never actually called them rules, which is interesting, but there are different things that I've learned along the way. And although my book is called Squeeze the Lemon, the real title should be What I Wish They Told Me in 1986 when I started in sales, because I had to figure out so many of these things myself. But I do believe, Jeff, and I think this is so important, not everything works for everybody and not everything works in every situation. And as a new sales manager at ADP, I wanted to cookie cutter everybody. I wanted them all to be little Lisa Peskins. I wanted them to have my same work ethic, did things exactly the way I do things. But you know what? I came to realize that we could get from point to A to point B in a very different route. And so my answer to your question is yes, I do think that there's some things I've learned along the way, the I's dotted, the T's crossed, that I've learned, and you're calling them rules, but I'm calling them key things to be successful. Make sure you're presenting to all the decision makers, present in person, no loosey goosey next steps, right? Set up appointments for the decision as opposed to a loosey goosey next step. Make sure you uncover your needs before their needs. All that stuff is an important part of our processes. And oftentimes when I start working with somebody, I realize that they're missing a little piece, just one little piece. And sometimes we think, Jeff, that, oh my God, if I'm underperforming, if for me to get to be a superstar, it's just so much. But the fact of the matter is, there's sometimes just little things that you could be doing, these rules that you're talking about, that could be the difference between somebody being extremely successful and someone struggling.
It's interesting because like, I'm listening to the things that you're pointing out as being consistent. I'm like, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then I start to backtrack a little bit and think to myself, and you did qualify this. You said not everything's going to work for anybody in, in every situation. And I look at the things like, making sure you don't have loosey goosey next steps, right? That you're clear on your next steps. Like, I think that's a pretty obvious one. I don't know if I could find any wiggle room in there to say like, well, you could if you want it, but no, you pretty much want to have solid next steps. It's interesting because when I think of the things that have been successful for me as a salesperson, in my development of being able to close more of the work that I have come in, stand for my pricing and all those sorts of things, they're almost like, I don't want to call them like strategies or tactics because they're not. They're just more about like ways of positioning and framing myself in that conversation that allow me to kind of stand my ground and get what I want. And the kind of points that you describe sound to me like things that virtually anybody could do. But then there's this sort of X factor of sales where like some people have a certain it and some people have a certain other it. Like some people are really good about keeping track of what's in their CRM, hitting, touching people on a regular basis, sending, really, great notes, understanding what their kids' names are. Like they're really good at like the nuts and bolts of like understanding people and making that into a process. Other people, they don't even have to send a proposal. They can close just by showing up and doing a certain thing. So how much of sales, you're training people, how much of it are you trying to draw out what is their natural ability and maybe where they gravitate towards sales success versus kind of teaching a foundation of things that work for everyone? How do you go about doing that so that it works for people?
So again, because not everything works for everybody, not everything works in every situation, you need a certain framework or structure, but I do believe it's different for different companies and different individuals. And Jeff, I'll tell you, I could tell you why you've been successful in one easy word or two easy words: genuine and authentic, right? You're real. And it's not about you trying to sell anything. But the other thing is your confidence in the work that you could do with people. And so you could justify your fee structure because you're providing value. And so, yes, I do believe salespeople, business development people, non-selling professionals, you've got to believe that you could truly help, right? And then you've got to figure out what the best way for you to be able to go about doing what you're doing. So what's your 30, 60, 90-day game plan? So we first got to figure out what are the activities I'm doing, what are the right activities, and what's the right way for me to be doing these activities. And I say to a lot of salespeople, forget you're a salesperson. You're no longer a salesperson. You're a packaging consultant. You're a payroll consultant. You're a marketing consultant. And I'm no longer going to pay you if you make the sale. I'm only going to pay you if you can find somebody that you could help out. And if we switch that mindset just slightly, then we don't have to worry about that line in the sand where we become too pushy or car salesman-y. But I do believe to my core that there are some basic fundamentals of what you need to do to be successful in sales. We started working with a brand new company recently. It's the CEO of the company. And she called me last Friday, I think just about this time last Friday. And she said, Lisa, guess what? It worked. I asked for a referral. It worked. Now, you and I, like the back of our hands, we know about asking for referrals, but she never had the words and the way to ask for a referral. And already, I mean, I think we've been working with them 3 weeks and they've already gotten a bunch of net new appointments that they would have never gotten. That's what makes it exciting. But, you know, I do believe that there's some tactics that I've learned along the way that I think are critical to sales success.
Yeah. One that, I can't remember who said this, but I either heard it on a podcast. It's like you listen to so much stuff, you forget where stuff comes from. So whoever said this, I shout you out and I don't know who you are, but they said, anytime you hear from your customer, thank you, ask for a referral. And I was like, that is such an interesting trigger. That because when they're saying not like thank you, like send it over, thanks for sending it over, not like every time like that, but like when they're genuinely thanking you for the work that you've done and they're happy, like that's the ideal time to be like, great, oh my God, I'm so happy that you got something from that. Listen, since right now it's kind of fresh in your mind, you're enjoying the work we're doing together, can you do me a favor and just take a moment and think, is there anybody else that you know that would benefit from the sort of work that we've done together and someone that you would introduce me to? And when somebody said that, it really just triggered for me that like, that's such a brilliant way of thinking about it. And there's probably so many other parts throughout the sales process and standard sales situations where there are these other triggers. Another trigger for me that always comes into play is I find one of the big swings for me in sales was when I shifted the energy of sales conversations. And the way I did that is there's a book that I talk about all the time. I'm not sure if you've read it. If you haven't, it's amazing. You'll probably love it. It's called Pitch Anything, and it's by Oren Klaff. And there's obviously a distinction between pitching and sales, but they're fundamentally in the same kind of arena. And there's a concept in the book known as prizing. And what he talks about in that is that essentially when people are going up and pitching, they're often very like needy. They like want the investor's money. They're like, oh, please, like we have this great thing, invest in us, invest in us. But what he says is like, if you think about it, they have money, which is a commodity. Everybody's got money, but there's only one of you that does what you do and what has what you have. So why are you making them the prize when in fact you're the prize? They're just somebody who has money and you're deciding whether or not you want to work with them. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways you could look at that concept. It could sound cocky, but for me, I think part of the reason why I come off confident in situations is that I really do think that like I only have so much time and I'm going to go 110% with anybody that I work with. So I really do think I have a lot to offer. So I'm not going to like just give that away or lower my price or anything. Like I'm looking for people that are going to appreciate that. So like sell me on it. Like why should we work together? And when I flip that energy, I've found I've had more often than not that the prospective customers will kind of chase me for why I should be the one to work with them and to give them one of my few slots that I have open. So that's been a huge kind of trigger for me is looking for that. So when you mentioned the referral thing, it kind of got me thinking about like all the different points that there are like habits that you can build in the sales process. What are some of the ones that you're recommending or that you're helping to focus on? Because you mentioned referrals and that's probably a very standard one. You've got this whole thing about your pipeline, repeat selling, cross-selling, net new opportunities. How do you get people to think of it in the moment?
Okay. So there's a couple things, but in a nutshell, what I think about all the time is what you just spoke about, which is squeezing the lemon. Okay. And most people think I'm referring to making lemonade out of lemons. It has nothing to do with that. Is how do you get the most out of everything that you do? How do you be purposeful, whatever you do? And how do you accomplish the most? So squeeze the lemon, in our personal life is I hit the microwave for 5 minutes. What can I do in that 5 minutes? I'm walking up the stairs to put down my daughter. What are all the things I might be able to pick up on the way up? But you just gave a perfect example of how we could squeeze the lemon in our sales efforts. So you get a compliment And you and I thought talked about this, but I might not have been the individual that had given you this idea. But anytime we do get a compliment from a client, how do we truly squeeze the lemon? So if someone says, "Oh my God, Jeff, you are awesome sauce. You helped me with my business. It's grown significantly. You always give 110%. I think you are the very best out there." Squeeze the lemon, as you spoke about, could be asking for a referral. Squeeze the lemon could be saying, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much. You just made my day. Could I ask you the biggest favor in the whole wide world? Could you take what you just said and put it into a LinkedIn recommendation? I often find people are checking me out on LinkedIn, and that would be so helpful." And by the way, I've somehow accumulated over 60 of those just by doing that very thing. Because when we think about it, if all of you walk outside right now and there's nobody around and there's $100 bill sitting in the middle of that road, how many of you are walking over that $100 bill? So with whatever we're going to pick it up. So getting a compliment without squeezing the lemon, without asking for a referral, asking for a LinkedIn recommendation, may I use you as a reference? All these things are squeezing the lemon. Then you spoke about something else that I think is really important, Jeff. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but you're in the best stage of a salesperson or business development person, and it's called the picky stage. So you get to be picky because you only want to work with folks that you want to work with. And you know what? You only have so many slots of people that you can be working with. So you're pretty picky as far as who you get to be with. With the picky stage also comes a lot less pushing, as you were just talking about, because it's more like, "Oh my God, I want one of those slots." But there are so many other things, and I'll try to share a couple more with you, Jeff. So we have to ask tough questions often in the sales process. What are the tough questions? I got to know who's making this decision. I got to know if you're looking at any other alternatives. I got to know what criteria you're using. Do you have a budget? What's your timeline for making a decision? Is this a must have or like to have? What's the ROI? But we can't ask some of these questions comfortably all the time, because if I say, "What's your budget?" you're not going to tell me. Because if you say $50,000, I'm going to charge you $49,999. But a prefacing phrase, a softening phrase, just out of curiosity, Jeff, I know that this is a pretty big decision. Other than BDU, are you looking at any other alternatives? And I know that it's important to decide who you're going to be partnering with. What is going to go into your decision? And if you don't mind me asking, and so on and so forth. So asking little prefacing phrases. I never realized I did it. Staffing phrases. It's a little tactic that I figured out. Barbara Walters used to just preface it with a bunch of different statements. Diane Sawyer would cock her head. But how can you be genuine and authentic? And like you said, really care about the person in front of you? Because if you come off that way, it's going to be critical. One last thing, and I'll let you get a word in edgewise. Referencing other people that you've been able to help out. So if I'm talking to banks, I'm talking about all the banks that I've been able to help out. If I'm talking to tech companies, I'm talking about the managed service person I work with that sold over $1.3 million. So all these little things, I've actually put in a workbook that I'm going to be publishing at some point shortly. But I do think that there's a lot of, as you called, rules or tricks or tactics.
I love it. You made me think of so many things here. Like, I love the softening of defenses. That's what I would call that, softening their defenses. And like there's another sometimes called setting up their listening. Like, so for instance, if you did have to ask the budget question, you could say something along the lines of like, "Listen, I'm about to ask you the question that everyone hates. I want you to know this next question is probably going to make you uncomfortable. You're probably not going to want to answer it. It's going to be terrible. This is the uncomfortable part of the meeting. Are you ready?" I need to know around what your budget is. It can be a range, but I need to get a sense if we're in the right conversation, so we know if we can move to the next step and even talk, right? So by kind of building it up and building it up and building it up, that when you come crashing down with that basic question of like, and you're not even saying, give me a number, give me a range, just so I know what I can play in if like we're in the same place, right? So it softens it, it makes it easy. So I love that. And I think there's so much about sales that I think likability is a really big factor. That, the old expression, it goes know, like, and trust. And what's interesting is I actually, and this just occurred to me in this conversation as we were talking about it, I just read a book called The Code of Trust. And it's a book all about basically how to build trust. And probably the most important thing in it is you have to basically make everything about the other person that you're talking to, and you have to validate them. So whatever it is, like validate them for it, be generous, and make it all about them and their interests, right? And when I think about the way that I typically go about selling, I'm trying to figure out everything. Like, what do you need? And can I help you? And if I can help you, then like even my sales offer is in service of helping you, right? So it's all about helping you. And throughout the conversation, I think I tend to be pretty likable. So like you're doing the know, like, and trust in that process. So it hadn't even really occurred to me about that. But the way that you framed the softening defenses made me think of that. You brought up a couple of things earlier, and I wanted you to comment on them if you could. So the first is you said suspect and prospect, this is just a logistical thing. I'd like you to define those two. The other thing is you talked a little bit about, in one of your examples, sales incentives, kind of indirectly, talking about like, I don't want you to think of yourself as a salesperson. I want to pay you when you make when you help someone, right? There's a lot of sales organizations out there that I think are incentivizing people in a particular way that may be causing people to cut corners and rush the process and not do their best work. What is your perspective on the best type of sales incentives to put into an organization so that you're able to do your best, most authentic and ethical selling?
Oh my gosh. All right. So let's first go to suspect and prospect, and I'll take that one first. The difference to me is a suspect is the right person, the right company, the right industry, the right geographic area, but you have no idea if they need whatever your product or service is. So it's a suspect. A prospect is all the same things, but they're in need of your service or could use your service. And we have to sometimes figure out whether or not it's they have a need or don't have a need. So that's the difference there.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
As far as sales incentives, this was a lesson that it probably took me way longer to learn it than I should have ever. But I was under the misconception that everybody wanted to be number one in sales. Because quite honestly, all I really cared about at the end of the day was getting the plaques saying I beat everybody else. And I collected 100 pieces of wood. I remember one time, my OCD behaviors, I put them in chronological order, right? And put them up on my wall. But that was all I really cared about. I'm a competitive person and I wanted to be the very best I could be and be recognized for it. But what I came to realize is not everybody cares about that. Some people care about being number one. Some people, it's only about the money. Some people, it's they want to get to another level. More and more, I'm hearing something that is actually a little bit of nails on a blackboard for me, but I hear it from younger people or people that might be a little bit older, but quality of life, when I hear that for sales. But, we really have to determine what's going to incentivize people. So I remember, again, this is probably, I'm going to say 1994. I felt that the people on my team were going after their own individual goals, but they weren't going after the team goals. And some of them would sandbag, right? And hold back. And some of them really weren't doing everything they can to be as successful as possible. So I asked the team, I said, you know what? Let's come up with a team goal. What do you want it to be? So they said, we wanted you to take us out to lunch and let us pig out and order as many appetizers as we possibly can. And I got to tell you, the first month I made an hourglass. I gave everybody a different color. They colored in their numbers. And once we got to 105%, we got to pig out. And then the next month it was an umbrella with different raindrops, and they got a color in the raindrops. And every time we would go, literally, I'll have one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these. So when it comes to setting up the sales incentives for your company, figure out what your salespeople care about. And like, even there's a company out there that I love to refer companies to. It's taken a hit since it's in the travel business. But back in my days at ADP, all I really cared about was I'm making my president's club. So a lot of the companies I'm working with, I've had them set up little incentive trips. And then you got to look at the comp structure, right? Salary, commission, bonuses, benefits, contest. You guys, if you have a large sales force, set up some good contests, put money aside for that. So I can't give you a blanket answer as far as incentives, but understand your particular sales force, the individuals on your sales force, and what matters the most. I remember one time I was going after a Toomey bag. I don't even know if people carry Toomey bags anymore, but it was like a $500-600 bag that I would never buy myself. And this contest was all about a Toomey bag. And I was so proud of myself for getting that Toomey bag. So again, you have to figure out what works for everybody.
I love it. I love it. Well, you brought up something that I think is a really good point for us to end on. And we have obviously 50 more podcasts in the queue for us to talk about sales, because there's just so much to it and it's such a rich subject. Where I want to end on, because you made me think of it with the competitiveness and the kind of the aggressiveness, right? So I am a white male, and I'm quite comfortable in virtually every setting for that reason, and I imagine others. But sales for me, there's never been any sort of additional issue or hurdle that I have to overcome. Now, you're a woman. You've been in sales situations. There's additional layers there, right? And then if we go down and you're running an organization where you're training people of all shapes and sizes, every kind of background, every sort of gender identity, sexual identity, religion, color, everything, right? The issues are going to be different in how we train people to sell and walk into different types of environments. And I'm not as well versed on what that means and how you go about doing that and what those things are. And because you have access to training in so many different, different variables, I'm curious about some of the advice that you would give people outside of those that look like me, right? Like I think sales for white men makes me generally think of like Boiler Room and like Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street and stuff like that. It's like the images that come to mind. I'm not generalizing saying all white men sell like that, but I mean, just in terms of the culture of sales, there's very much a culture of competitive, hyper aggressive, and there's a culture that supports that. I'm curious what sales looks like outside of that bubble, and what are some of the issues that might come up there? What's some of the advice you might give for people who aren't going to be able to just necessarily just phone it in like that?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up because it is different for us. I remember one of the interviews a long time ago, and I won't mention the company. I was asked by the interviewer told by the interviewer that I better prove myself because he's got a lot of women that are going out on maternity leave, to the fact that when I was a VP of sales over at ADP, there was only 5 women in my position across the country. And I was trying to show women that you could be a boss and a mom and still be successful. And I was trying to break that glass ceilings. I've got another challenge in addition to being a woman, is that I've got blonde hair and I'm not tall in stature, although I'm tall for my height. But a lot of people might look at me and say, this person doesn't know what she's talking about. And so we do have those challenges. And even sad to say, but 3 years ago, I was told that this CEO would not work with me because I was a woman. And we need to deal with that. But you know what? I'm going to bring him up because he was my hero. And I know you talk about superheroes, but it's my dad's birthday today. And he passed away 23 years ago as a double amputee who never complained a moment in his life. But he said, you don't have control about everything that happens to you in life, Lisa, but you have control how you handle it. And you know what? I understand that we are perceived differently sometimes. So you know what? Be professional, be a little bit better than you need to be in order to be able to compete, because sometimes you're going to be perceived a little bit differently than the man next to you. And I remember one of the first companies I worked to, I found out that he was making 30% more than I was because he was a man. So you know what? All I could say is to net out this answer to you is we're smart women. And you know what? If we genuinely believe in what we do and how we could help, you have control over your own success. And I wouldn't let all this other nonsense really affect the way you're looking at things. Not to say that we don't have our challenges, but instead of focusing on what we can't do, let's focus on what we can do. Get rid of the apostrophe T.
Love it. Love it. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Again, I feel like I could talk to you for hours upon hours upon hours talking about sales and everything, even non-sales stuff. You're just a delight to talk to. We'll definitely schedule a follow-up and talk some more about different aspects of sales. Let's figure out like what other ground we can cover on it, because there's so much. And maybe next time, instead of just jumping on and whatever comes to mind, we'll work out some sort of an agenda for it. But tell people where they can go and be social with you, where they can learn more about what you're doing, where they can download your ebooks and resources, and just follow all things Lisa Peskin.
Well, thank you so much. And first of all, Jeff, I agree. I could have probably spent the rest of the day and night speaking with you. This is something I realized I'd become a sales nerd, so I in social situations, I love speaking about this kind of stuff because it's all about helping other people. And I think that's what this is all about. The easiest way to get in touch is to go to our website, businessdevelopmentuniversity.com. And when you talk about resources, check out our BDUtensils. I've taken all these tools that I've developed over the years and I've collected over the years, and they're right there for free. So you can download any of them. Another exciting thing is every single Friday, we run a sales success peer group. And I had one of your co-hosts from Sales Success Stories join us this week. We have some amazing programming that you should definitely check out. We're even setting up a book club. So you've given me some great ideas for the books. There's ways to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, but the best way is first get in touch with me. And if I could help you in any way, it would be my pure pleasure. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. We try to give you a lot of great information that's going to be valuable to you, because it's all about one little thing can make the huge difference.
Awesome. And listeners, if I can sell you on anything today, it would be to stop by and check out the show notes for this episode. You should be able to see it in whatever podcast player you're in. I'm going to put links to absolutely everything that Lisa just talked about, so you don't even have to leave your podcast listening experience to go and get your way right over and get those free resources. This has been an absolute pleasure for me. I'm so glad that we got back in touch after so many years, but that we're also able to jump on and do a podcast episode together. There's plenty more for us to cover, which we will cover in the future. But for now, I would just say I think this episode is fantastic. There's tons in there. It's the sort of thing people should share, which I guess would make it shareable.